welcome to today's program, Bullying in the Legal Profession, Its Impact on Lawyers and Recommendations for Change. I'm Ala Policastro, CLE Advisor for the Beverly Hills Bar Association, and I am delighted to introduce today's speakers, Stephanie Scharf and Roberta Bobby Liebenberg. Stephanie is well known for innovative work in the areas of organizational excellence, diversity, equality and inclusion, strategic growth, talent development, and enterprise management. Her consulting work is enhanced by over 30 years of practice working with national and global corporations, as a partner at Kirkland Ellis, a partner at Jenner & Block, and most recently, founder of Scharf Banks Marmor LLC, a nationally prominent women-owned law firm. Stephanie has designed and co-authored many studies about the factors that impact long-term professional careers. Bobby is a senior partner at Fine, Kaplan & Black in Philadelphia and also a principal at the Red Bee Group, a woman-owned consulting group that helps businesses, organizations, and law firms achieve their goals and use data-based strategies with diverse and innovative solutions. She focuses her practice on antitrust, class actions, and complex commercial litigation. She has written and spoken extensively about many issues of importance to lawyers, including co-authoring groundbreaking reports about bullying and the legal profession. And we cannot wait to hear what you both have to share with us today.
Thank you, Olive.
Thank you, Olive, really, for your very kind introduction. And on behalf of Bobby as well, we are very pleased to be able to share the results of our research on bullying and what the research means for lawyers going forward and for companies and law firms and all the places where lawyers work. So the problem of bullying lawyers has been around ever since I've practiced law. In the old days, the prevailing advice was, well, just suck it up and don't complain. Or it's the way lawyers do their job. You'll just have to take it, and if you don't like it, you can leave. And in the 35 years I've been practicing law, many aspects of the practice have changed. But bullying continues to be an all too frequent way of, let's say, managing work, as people put it, or managing people. And when asked, some lawyers say they've never been bullied, but a large and really large, increasingly large number of lawyers today say otherwise. And whether they practice in law or companies or not-for-profits. Bullying has a lot of harmful impacts. It can create a workplace culture where individuals are threatened or demeaned or belittled. Lawyers who are bullied can be afraid to come forward. Employers may not even know about it, but when they do, they may not know how to address that kind of conduct. And it's not only individual lawyers who suffer from being bullied. Bullying tolerated by a workplace can have negative effects on the business itself, such as lower productivity, harm to reputation of the company or firm, and people leaving because of the culture of bullying that they don't want to work in. So if we can turn to the first slide, please. With all of that context in mind, we are going to focus today on the research we did, bullying in the legal profession, and the big picture questions that come out of it. And we really also would like to thank the Illinois Supreme Court for sponsoring this research. It's the biggest and first of its kind in the US, and it focuses in on big picture questions. What types of bullying occur in the workplaces where lawyers practice? What happens after bullying occurs? What do employers do about it? And what is the long-term impact of bullying on people, on workplaces, and on the profession as a whole? And as I mentioned, this is the largest wide-scale research ever conducted in the US on this topic. We used a very interesting multifaceted technology or methodology for the research. We conducted a survey of all lawyers registered to practice and actually practicing in the state of Illinois. And as a result, we got a survey participation of over 6,000 Illinois lawyers. We also conducted focus groups throughout the state of Illinois. We wanted to do some in-depth discussion about how the problems come up and what solutions people think there are for bullying. We wanted to have a diverse state, and we did have a diverse group of response to the survey, but we also had a really diverse group by all sorts of criteria of attorneys and judges who served on a research advisory council as thought leaders for the research. So we certainly received many frank and astounding comments in the course of our research, both in the survey itself and in the focus groups. And people really spoke from their souls. I mean, it was quite touching to actually do the analysis and read the results of the survey, because people spoke about their experiences and their reactions, and it really made the statistical results come to life. Why don't we go to the next slide? And Bobby, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thank you to the Beverly Hills Bar Association. We're really delighted to present this research. So it's important to remember that bullying is more than incivility, being rude, or disrespectful. And so, as set forth on this slide, the definition that we used in our survey was inappropriate behavior intended to intimidate, humiliate, or control the actions of another person. And that conduct can include both verbal and nonverbal, as well as physical acts. And the reason we chose to define bullying like this is because workplace anti-harassment laws and policies apply only to abusive conduct that is targeted at someone due to a protected characteristics such as gender, sexual orientation, or other personal characteristic. And therefore, bullying that cannot be proven to be motivated by such a characteristic may not be illegal and may not be subject to an organization's anti-harassment laws. And given that bullying, there is really no set standards, and there was really no database until we conducted this survey about the extent and impact of bullying. This research was very important. And indeed, as you look at the slide, I think one of the most surprising statistics was how often bullying takes place. So while the Illinois Supreme Court sponsored this research, we believe bullying exists everywhere. It is not confined to Illinois. And in fact, when you look at the data, 1 in 4 lawyers reported that in the past year, they had been personally bullied at work, and 13% experienced bullying on multiple occasions in that year. And we chose to look at, in terms of the survey, when did it occur? And we wanted a temporal scope that was close in time so that these experiences would be fresh. And in the open-ended questions that Stephanie described, people did talk about the trauma of being bullied in at times more than a year ago. But again, our temporal scope was in 2023, 2024. And when you extrapolate this result to more than the 55,000 active Illinois lawyers, it meant that over 13,000 lawyers in Illinois had experienced some form of bullying in the course of 1 year, which is really astonishing and sad, and I think really emphasizes the importance of understanding the prevalence, the impact, and the steps to combat bullying. Next slide, please. Stephanie.
So in the past year, what we did is we looked at who was more likely to be bullied at work. And this is not to say that only certain groups of people are bullied at work, but it is to say that certain demographic groups are much more likely to be bullied at work. So that 38% of women lawyers, compared to only 15% of male lawyers, reported that they were bullied at work. 38% of lawyers with an impairment that substantially limits a major life activity were bullied, compared to 23% of lawyers without that level of disability. Regarding race and ethnicity, 23% of white lawyers reported being bullying in the last year, but lawyers of color really ranging, depending on your racial or ethnic group, from 28% to 35%, a much higher percentage of lawyers of color were bullied in the past year, at least once. And by the way, these statistics are bullied in the past year at work at least once, and sometimes multiple or very frequent times, like weekly. Even older lawyers get bullied. While it's true that the youngest age cohort, age 25 to 35, in that group, 39% of young lawyers reported bullying, and the likelihood of bullying decreases with each age group, each older group, but even much older lawyers are bullied. And sexual orientation is another factor that enhances the frequency of bullying. 29% of lawyers who are gay, lesbian, or bisexual were the target of verbal bullying related to their sexual orientation, compared to 3% of heterosexual lawyers.
And Stephanie, I want to just add with respect to age, especially in this cohort of lawyers ages 66 to 75 who were bullied, we really found that that had to do with comments and about they were past their prime. It had issues to do with succession, and really trying to ensure this transition. But we also found that especially with younger lawyers, we got a number of comments that talked about how ingrained it was in the legal profession to haze and to mistreat and overwork young lawyers. And I think we really received a ton of comments that this was about hazing, that this type of conduct was, as Stephanie said at the beginning, was really something that was normalized in legal organizations.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. And we asked about many different types of bullying, but there are 7 most common types of bullying experienced by lawyers in the past year. The most commonly experienced type of bullying was verbal intimidation, insults, name calling, shouting. The second most common form of bullying, and by the way, people can reported more than experiencing more than one type of bullying, but the most common type was verbal intimidation. The second most common type was harsh, belittling, or excessive criticism. You know, you idiot, you don't know what you're doing. You'll never be able to be a lawyer, and I could go on and on. Demeaning nonverbal comments. Sometimes that's hovering, sometimes it's violating body space, and there are all other sorts of ways of demeaning nonverbal behaviors. The fourth most common was routinely subject to unrealistic, unreasonable work demands. Calling you up on a Saturday night and saying, I need this done Sunday morning. That's a very common example that people complained about. Another type of bullying that was common was behind the back false accusations, malicious rumors, and then improperly taking credit for your work was another form of bullying. And the 7th most common form was not receiving important work information. like not getting deadlines from your partner, and then you don't make the deadline, and then the partner complains, or not being invited to core meetings when matters of substance and importance are being discussed that impact the work you do. Now, these are the reports from people who were bullied. If we do a click here, if we click the screen, we'll see. We also heard from people who admitted they bullied others. In fact, 150 respondents said, yes, I've bullied people in the last year. And the types of bullying they reported doing, the 7 most common types of bullying reported by lawyers doing the bullying were a matchup to the 7 most common bullying experiences reported to us by the targets of bullying. So this type of reporting about the frequency of this behavior has a real validity, a basic reality to it. Because when you ask victims and when you ask the bullies, they tell you, yes, that's exactly the behavior that happens.
And Stephanie, I wanted to add, I mean, given the times, one of the types of conduct we also found was cyberbullying. That was something that many people experienced. And again, something that was at least shocking to me was that 26% of lawyers who were bullied said that they had been bullied to say or do something unethical or improper in the past year. So again, when people talk about what is bullying, it's really crossing that line and crossing over beyond zealous advocacy to being bullied to do something that is improper. And finally, again, while we know that bullying impacts all lawyers, as we've gone through in the statistics, underrepresented groups actually do get bullied more. And what was interesting to me was, with respect to gender, 40% of women lawyer respondents experienced verbal bullying, such as negative innuendos, jokes, or even threats related to their gender, as compared to just 17% of men.
Bobby, I think you have the next slide.
So we've talked about who is bullied, who are the bullies, and as we found in our report and in the data, bullying is really the result of an imbalance of power. And when you look at who are the bullies, this definitely explains why this conduct goes on. So it's generally a more senior lawyer who uses their power to control, intimidate the person they're bullying. So we found that in one-on-one bullying, the bullying is often a lawyer in the same firm or company who is more senior, 31%. Of those lawyers were in a different, more powerful level. We also found that in many cases, as demonstrated in the comments that we received, it was a rainmaker or a real leader in the legal organization like the general counsel, which made it very hard for the people who were the victims of this conduct. Less frequent was bullying by a lawyer at the same or a more junior level. But when you look at 33% of lawyers were also bullied by someone who didn't work in the same workplace, such as opposing counsel, or as you see in the bullet above, even 7% reported that clients might bully them. And that was particularly demonstrated by comments where clients wanted lawyers to do something that bordered on this unethical, improper conduct, which they determined or thought would be more zealous advocacy. It was also disturbing to see the number of lawyers who were also bullied by judges, again, by the types of conduct that Stephanie described, excessive criticism, demeaning comments, conduct such as that. But as we said, it is definitely as a result of this imbalance of power. And it is important, again, we feel, for organizations to really understand and to collect the data about who is being bullied, but importantly, who are those bullies? Stephanie.
Thank you.
And next slide, please.
So we want to talk for a few minutes about what lawyers do after they are bullied. And there's actually two types of after. One is in the moment, and the other is when it's over and they've left the scene. And we asked people in the moment, what did you do when you were bullied? And again, this is all reactions about bullying in the past year. And over 50%, really over 60% of lawyers said their immediate response to bullying was just to ignore it or to walk away. They just didn't want to have to deal with it. Now, sometimes you can't walk away. If you're in court being bullied by opposing counsel or the judge, you can't walk away. But in those situations, when bullying occurred, the most common reaction was to basically ignore it and or walk away. And then another reaction, which was all most of the remaining people, was to verbally defend themselves or sometimes just get upset and angry in the moment. So there's no question that people get upset about it, but what they do about it right away is not always the same. Now, it really begs the question also about what do lawyers do, not just immediately after they're bullied, but when they leave the scene of it. And a majority of lawyers told a friend or family member or a colleague that about the incident. Only 20% reported the bullying to their supervisor or an upper level attorney or an HR manager. And we think there are a lot of reasons why that's so, including in many situations, there's a sense that nobody will help them anyway. So they have to kind of just take it. Another 20% took no action at all. They may have felt bad, they may have been angry about it, but they didn't tell anyone and they didn't report it to anyone. There's also other reactions. Sometimes people took personal time off. Sometimes if the bully was in the workplace, targets of bullying asked their employer to remove them from working with the bully. That has its own issues as well. Very few lawyers, only 2%, file any kind of report to a legal authority. And interestingly, 8% said they contacted the bully and complained directly to the bully about their behavior. And we had a small percentage of bullies saying, yes, they were contacted by the person they bullied and they talked about it. But that's not a very common result. So, you know, there's lots of, in the course of our survey, we didn't just have closed-ended questions. We, along the way, solicited responses from people who were bullied. And very often you have very poignant reactions like, I stood there and I froze. I just couldn't do anything. Or, what's the point of reporting it? Nothing ever happens. So one of the hallmarks of the type of research we do, yes, we have statistics, but if you read our report, it's filled with individual comments and reactions for each of the things that we're discussing today. Bobby?
And I just want to add to something, if you go back to that slide, and that is about bystander bullying and an important data point that Stephanie just emphasized. So I think especially where you see that 62% of lawyers reported they were bullied with others present, and 79% of bystanders who witnessed bullying either, as Stephanie said, either took no action or walked away. Only 19% who witnessed the bullying took any action to diffuse the situation, and less than 5% took any action to actually stop the bullying. And we're going to talk about steps for recommendations, but we think it is really important with respect to bystander when they've witnessed bullying to intervene, because somehow when bystanders see bullying and they don't do anything, it sort of leaves the bully with more room to continue that conduct. They feel that that type of behavior can go unchecked. So again, we're going to be talking about bystander bullying and training, but I did want to raise that, Stephanie. So if we go to the next slide, what do employers say or do when bullying is reported to them? So, which would not be atypical. Most employers express concern about what happened, but then what happens? They took really no action at all. Some employers threatened or ignored the problem. Some suggested that the victim was actually at fault. Some dismissed the complaint as not important. There were 7% who told the victim they'd be better off not making a complaint and not telling anyone about it, or suggesting that the victim, rather than the bully, switch departments. And so again, this type of conduct sort of re-traumatizes the individual who has been bullied. And as I said, in the open-ended questions, a lot of the comments were about what happened when bullying conduct was ignored. And many times when they had to report the bullying under HR procedures, they actually had to report the bullying to the bully himself or herself, which again was ineffective. Stephanie.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. And we also ask people, and this is consistent with the last slide, to rate their employer's response to bullying. And given what employers, many have told us employers fail to do when someone reports an incident of bullying, it shouldn't be a surprise that the majority of respondents were not completely satisfied with their employer's response. 18% rated their employer's response to a report of bullying as excellent, but we can see in this chart, and another 30% rated their employer's response as good, but 52% of respondents rated their employer's reaction as either not sufficient or totally unsatisfactory. And again, only 18% rated their employer's response as excellent. Now, what does a good employer do? We received a lot of comments from lawyers about what a good employer did. They took the matter seriously and took action. Someone bullied from opposing counsel told us my employer defended me and responded to opposing counsel's email appropriately. Another report was my employer took immediate action to ensure the bullying would not happen again, and I was very impressed and felt my concerns were properly addressed. But on the other hand, there were many more lawyers who were very disappointed in how their employer reacted. And a sampling of comments: the head of HR failed to address my concerns and seems to foster an environment conducive to bullying within that department. And we heard that repeatedly, by the way. We heard repeated disappointment with what HR does, what the human resources or the equivalent office in a workplace does when they learn about bullying. And that was reflected in the 77% who kind of said, oh, that's terrible, but how few employers do anything. Other reactions from lawyers: my employer said that was how the bully got things done. Or it's happening to others, nothing is being done, and I'm told I cannot do anything. Someone else told us, well, the excuse was the bully has a history of this action. And my employer said they verbally reprimand him, but nothing changes. So, consistent with this level of disappointment is what we found from reports from people who told us they had been bullied in the past year. And 96% of bullies, I'm sorry, I may have misspoke. These are reports from bullies, the ones who we told you about before. So, of the 150 people in the survey who said they had been bullied, the vast majority, 96%, told us they experienced no consequences at all from their bullying behavior. Only 3% got a verbal warning from their employer, and only 1% got a stricter consequence from a verbal warning. And I've seen incidents like that. I remember one incident when a bully was not allowed for 1 year. He was a partner to serve on a firm committee. That was the extent. But then a year later, there he was back on the committee, and he continued to bully. So lawyers and know what's going on. And as Bobby discusses, how an employer responds really has consequences for individuals and for the workplace itself, both short-term and long-term.
If you go to the next slide. And I think what comes out of these comments is that individuals, victims of bullying, are afraid to report it because they don't want to be viewed as a troublemaker. They don't want to be viewed as someone who is, causing some kind of tension or conflict within the organization. And therefore, there's also sort of the subtle message, as Stephanie said, that you just need to deal with this. This is part of all of the type of conduct that older lawyers have been exposed to, and now it's sort of your turn to deal with this type of behavior.
And
And
in
bullying. Go ahead, Stephanie.
And in fact, we heard that many times in the open-ended comments. Whether the senior person was a woman or a man, very often their reaction was, well, I had to do it. It's part of becoming a lawyer. You just have to suffer that.
And I think, again, when we get into, there are certain areas of the law where we really received a great deal of comments about bullying. In litigation, for example, and Stephanie and I are both litigators, and we can tell some stories. I will tell one, which especially, again, this age differential, where older lawyers or more experienced lawyer may use bullying and abusive conduct really as a tactic. So I recall when I was a young lawyer and I was scheduled to take a deposition, and the opposing lawyer was sort of the dean of the class action bar in Philadelphia. And he was known to hover over the lawyer defending their witness, and he would do other sorts of tactics that would intimidate you and sort of get you off your game. And so knowing that, before I went to defend this deposition, I did some research on him. I took with me the name and phone number, not the name, but the phone number of the clerk for the judge and the judge, so that if it happened, I could report that behavior. And definitely that's what happened during the deposition. He got up, he tried to intimidate me. It was on video, so I was able to make a comment for the record so that if we wanted to bring additional motions afterward, I would have laid the foundation. And I tried to call the judge, who was not available, but the conduct did stop. And I think, again, when we talk about recommendations for training, that's definitely something that we're going to advise younger lawyers to do, almost role play the types of situations where they may encounter bullying, and what would be the types of conduct that they could take to offset that behavior. But again, going back to the slide, I think our data is a wake-up call for all leaders in all legal organizations in terms of what happens when bullying is allowed to exist. Because you'll see 54% of bullied lawyers report a negative change in their emotional well-being, anxiety, loss of self-confidence, and other negative feelings. 39% of bullied lawyers felt less productive at work. 20% actually had a physical reaction to being bullied, and their physical health actually did decline. And as a result of this, there is an impact to the bottom line to employers because they are going to lose employees. And again, our data shows what happens. So 18% of the lawyers who were bullied reported that they left a job practicing law because of workplace bullying. And again, extrapolating that number means that 10,000 lawyers in Illinois who currently practice in Illinois had left one job due to bullying. In addition, 9% of our respondents said that they were looking for a new job because of bullying. And again, if you extrapolate that number, that's over 5,000 lawyers in Illinois. And again, bullying has a disproportionate impact on underrepresented groups, and it results in bullying with women, LGBTQ plus lawyers, lawyers of color, and lawyers with a disability looking for a new job due to bullying. And as a result, this is going to impact our profession. It is going to impact the pipeline we want to establish to ensure that we have a wide array of talent going through our legal organizations. And importantly, this is a group of lawyers that employers have spent substantial time, investment of money to train. And again, they are going to vote with their feet and walk out the door.
And let me just supplement that for a minute by saying, while we did do this study in Illinois, Illinois is actually a very interesting state from which to think about other states as well. It's demographically diverse. In fact, its demography probably mirrors generally the demography of the country. It has a very broad array of practices. It has big city, suburban, and rural lawyers across the state. And it has very active bar association groups. So it's not like it's a state that's only rural, or it's not like it's a state where the majority of litigation is about drug use. It's not an area like that. It's really a very multifaceted group of lawyers, and it has implications, we believe, for many other states in the country.
And just going back again to these underrepresented groups, nearly 3 times as many women lawyers, so 28% of women compared to just 10% of men, had left the job due to bullying. And again, 25% of LGBTQ plus lawyers, 28% of disabled lawyers, and 24% of lawyers of color reported that they had left the job due to bullying. And when you think about those numbers and the impact of that in a legal organization, it is really important, we think, for all legal organizations to understand what is going on in their culture and to really have a culture survey where they measure and they look at this and what they're going to do once they find, if they do find that bullying has infected the culture of the organization. Stephanie.
I think we're turning to the next slide at this point. Bobby?
We wanted to give you some of the examples of the open-ended comments that we received, and again, you can really tell sort of the how heartfelt these comments were, not only in the written survey, but also in the focus groups. So I think talking about the impact on emotional well-being, bullying compounds itself. After being bullied, you begin to worry, then you have trouble sleeping, You come to work, but you aren't working at your full capacity. And again, this comment, which shows that nothing changes. He has a history of bullying. The employer claims they verbally reprimand him. Nothing changes. My senior partner treated me in a pathologically harsh manner. My employer said that was how the bully got things done, justifying the behavior. Again, where the bully is a rainmaker or in a position of real power, since the bully was the GC, no one was interested in what that occurred. And we've really found that a lot of comments, as I said before, about rainmakers. The sort of yin and yang, and especially law firms, that they're dependent on rainmakers, but at the same time, even though the culture that is created could be could be harmful, they're not going to do anything to stop it. Deleterious. There you go. Go ahead, Stephanie.
All right, let's go to the next slide. And we always like to do research that ends up with best practices, with really database best practices. And what we ended with in our report is, what can we, whoever, and that we is a lot of different people, what can we do to stop bullying? And the very first thing we spoke about in the report is what workplaces can do to develop and implement and enforce anti-bullying policies. Now, before how does a firm or company go about doing that? We have a phrase that we often use: it comes from the top. You can't expect change. Once in a while it happens, but you can't expect change to take place from the HR department or from one practice group, or from an entity that's like the administrative chief of staff. You really have to have the senior people or the senior person in charge of the workplace say, you know what? We're not going to tolerate this. This hurts lawyers. It hurts our business. It hurts our reputation. We have to do things differently. And we lay out in the report a set of steps that law firms and companies or agencies can take to do things differently. Now, there isn't a one size fits all. So one of the first things that we suggest is an informal, I don't want to call it an informal open door, tell me what you think about bullying and what's happening here and what we can do about it. A leader should do that under a pledge of, it's just going to be between you and me. I'm not going to tell your name. I mean, you can ask people in groups what they think, but part of finding out about the culture in ways that you may not know about as a leader are to have an open door invitation for lawyers and staff to reach out on the subject of bullying, and private conversations that can lead to very unexpected but very useful information. Now, turning to the framework of an effective policy, we also outline that. And an effective policy should be written and distributed to all employees with regular updating and annual redistribution, really an annual training session. And the first part of such a policy is a definition and examples of bullying. You could use examples like the ones that are in report, but the policy should also include a statement about where bullying can occur, such as one-on-one meetings or group meetings or interactions with clients and other places and other gatherings of lawyers, so people are sensitive to what the chances are of that kind of activity. The second thing in an effective policy is procedures for confidential and retaliation-free reporting. Both are important: confidentiality, retaliation-free. And certainly our research shows the importance of implementing safe and confidential and effective ways to report bullying. And in fact, many respondents to the survey and focus group members told us that they have felt and they have had friends who felt completely inhibited because there's a pressure in the culture. Just be a good team player, or don't make waves, or just suck it up, that famous phrase. And but what they are looking for and what can be effective are prompt methods and procedures for reporting and making it retaliation free. And the way to report is to designate two people, not one, because you could be hitting the person, as Bobby mentioned earlier, who actually is a bully, but to designate two people to be the persons to report to and to communicate with the individuals involved. And you don't want the reporting policy to prohibit even covert or subtle forms of retaliation by people in power, like a partner saying, okay, that person reported bullying, not going to give him any more work. So confidentiality and designated people to report to and discretion are very, very important part of an effective policy. And then, of course, you need procedures for prompt investigation and follow-up communication. And the investigation should lead to a report or a written record of the process and findings, and both the person making the charge as well as the person accused of bullying should be informed of the results. And there needs to be implementation of appropriate remedial actions. Not all misconduct and consequences are the same. And although we think it's infrequent, there are situations when a report of bullying may not be viewed that way by others. But for the most part, if it gets to the point where someone is kind of having the courage to report bullying, then you have to look at that and look at what investigate it and look at what the consequences should be. And depending on the nature of the misconduct, maybe it's a verbal reprimand, maybe it's a formal written reprimand, maybe it's mandatory training or change in leadership position or demotion, either temporary or permanent. Termination is even a possible action. It really depends on how serious the problem is. And remedial actions may also include changes in an organization's policies or practices. Because if there's a set of bullying incidents or a series of events, that really begs the question of, do we have a policy that's working? And what do we need to change it? Does there need to be changes in the policy or better training or other organization-wide actions? And the last thing about an effective workplace policy is once there is a resolution, a solution, a beginning, a middle, and end of a specific bullying activity, it's good to report, to check in 3 months later, let's say, with the person who reported the bullying and see how that person is doing and whether there's any additional information that would help a leader decide if this policy is effective and what it means.
And Stephanie, I would say 3 quick points with respect to establishing these policies. One, I'm going to emphasize again, it's really important to understand what is going on in your organization. If you're going to implement a policy, you have to know whether or not this type of conduct exists in your organization so you can really address and you can frame your policy in terms of what is happening in the organization. 2, the lack of consequences, the lack of any accountability, I would say is the major theme that came out of the comments in our survey in terms of this is what happens if there are no consequences. It is going to perpetuate this type of conduct. And third, it is really important when you have these policies to ensure that there are, as Stephanie said, these touch points where you go back to the victim and you really ensure, again, if you want to make sure that they're not going to be in that statistic of people either looking or leaving a job, that they feel that they're being heard, that this conduct is being addressed, and importantly, being remedied. So that takes us to our second recommendation, which is the importance of training. Once you have that policy, then you have to conduct the training specific to what, as Stephanie said, it's not going to be a cookie cutter policy, we hope. We hope it's going to be specific to the organizations. And the training should include, one, it should take place at least annually. Two, it should include, as we say, not only the definition and examples, but really giving scenarios. What is the difference between zealous advocacy and where it crosses the line to intimidation and abusive conduct? And also importantly, this training should include what happens when you are bullied. What are the types of steps that an individual lawyer can take? What are the types of steps that the leader or group practice leader should be taking in terms of ensuring that this conduct is not happening? Again, this is going to impact the bottom line. So people should be incentivized to one, understand the policy and participate in this training. And we also recommend that this training occur even before lawyers start in their jobs. Law schools have a responsibility, knowing the types of highly competitive, hierarchical organizations that many of their students will be entering in practice, to really teach them about bullying, and again, steps to combat it when they are in practice, whether it's within their firm, whether it's in court, whether it's in a deposition or other types of conduct that they may have to experience. So again, training is critical to our recommendations. Stephanie.
Thank you. So, Bobby and I may not have been so surprised, but a lot of the people on the advisory council, and really a lot of people who read the report, have told us they were surprised about how many complaints there were in the survey about judges and lawyers bullying in the courtroom, and how bullying is kind of flagrant in many settings in litigation. And sadly, really, there were more than a few reports of bullying by judges. You recall that 14% of our respondents complained about bullying from judges. And we feel like the data are very clear that the time is right for greater guidance from judges and litigators alike about what is acceptable and what is not. And certainly with respect to the courtroom, and the common view was, and the common statements that were made to us, well, if it's in the courtroom, it's on the judge. This is from a judge himself. Other judges have said, I set the tone, this minimizes inappropriate behavior. Another judge said, shooting it down right away is generally effective. And I remember another judge in one of the focus groups says, I don't tolerate it. If I see somebody bullying, if I hear about it, I tell them the next move they make, they're going to get reported to the ARDC. So these were judges who had firm, clear views about what they should be doing, but that wasn't always the case. And a lot of judges felt like where they weren't sure what to do, or they weren't sure, judges don't sit in standalone courtrooms. They're part of a circuit or a division. There are guidelines that they have to follow as well. And many of them said it would be really useful to have a set of, let's say, circuit-wide guidelines about what to do about bullying. So that is certainly one of our recommendations, that we recommend that there be standing orders regarding bullying and incivility in the courtrooms, because far too many lawyers and even judges said they have nowhere to turn when that happens. And judges and litigators alike can benefit from written guidance about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And in Illinois, we have very strong judicial training. It's going to be supplemented even more now with anti-bullying material. But certainly any kind of continuing judicial training, which I think takes place in the large majority of states, has to have something about bullying in the legal profession. So we do look to judges to set the standard and to make sure that people know there are standards and they have to be met.
And again, going back to judges, we think judges should receive training so that they can recognize they also have steps to take when bullying, that they intervene. And again, going back to this bystander training, we think it is really important when someone in power, like a judge or a leader, intervenes when they witness bullying, because that is the quickest, best way to stop that conduct. Of course, one of our recommendation, and we thank the Beverly Hills Bar Association because they're implementing that recommendation to continue to educate about this important topic and to advance programs so that we talk about coming up with anti-bullying set of standards, coming up with tactics, establishing a mentoring group where someone may be reluctant to talk about because they don't want to be labeled a troublemaker within their organization, but that they could reach out to someone within the bar association to talk about what is the best way to handle the situation if they are being bullied. So again, bar associations play an important role. And again, we thank you for sponsoring this program.
Yeah, and I would like to emphasize the safe space role that bar associations can play for victims of bullying to receive guidance, especially as Bobby pointed out, when they feel they have no other place to turn. We have one group in Illinois called Lady Lawyers Who Lunch, and it's actually a resource group formed by a group of women lawyers that serves as a safe place where lawyers who have been bullied in the course of litigation can discuss their experiences and receive guidance and really feel that they're being heard and that there is something that can be done about it. So it's not necessary, it can be a small group within a bar association that also really is effective for this process. That may be a good segue to our final topic here, which is how can individual lawyers react to bullying? And as Bobby mentioned before, one of the first pieces of advice that we give about that is to be prepared, to practice. Now, it was interesting because we both have been in this experience in litigation. And one of the pieces of advice we give is when you're in the room with someone who's trying to bully you, who's hovering over you, who's pounding the table, who's getting red in the face, who's pointing his finger, put that on the record. You can say right on the record, Mr. Smith, you're hovering over me, step away and go back to your seat. Mr. Smith, you're pounding the table. Mr. Smith, you're beet red shouting at me. Please calm down so we can continue with its deposition. A lot of times a lawyer will say, let's go off the record. No, the reporter won't go off the record unless both people agree. Say, no, we're staying on the record. So everything is there if you decide you need to do something about it after the fact. There are, of course, local rules and federal rules about what to do when someone is being disruptive in a deposition. Know the rules and cite them, and if you have to, use them right on the spot. Rehearsing is another technique that we're very fond of. Just like when you have a hearing or when you have an oral argument or when you have an opening statement, you rehearse it. If you anticipate a problem, think about how you're going to handle it. Talk to somebody else about it, a friend. What do you think about this? If he does that or she does that and I say this, how does that work? So rehearsing can be really, really effective. And if you're in court, you may decide to recite to the judge what the bullying is doing and putting that on the record, or to recite to the judge the cursing that the bully just did before the case was called and say this should not be taking place. And I believe that most judges are likely to agree to that. So there are lots of other ways that you can prepare individually. Talking to people especially is a really good way about whatever you want to talk about. But again, we have a whole set of information in the report that we wanted to get on the record and to share with people.
I would
Uh,
just add with respect to individuals, if you are being bullied, obviously chronicle what is going on, so you can decide what type of action you may want to take, but it'll be contemporaneous. And two, again, I would identify a mentor or someone who is a trusted advisor that can help you really talk about and talk through what are some of the solutions to this type of conduct that you may be encountering. And clearly, if your mental or physical health is being jeopardized, you really have to take immediate action. What is so important about this research is that we believe it is up to everyone in the legal profession to ensure that we have respect, civility, and that we have those who are in authority and who can set policy, enforce anti-bullying in our workplaces and in our courtrooms. So I don't know if we
I
have
know
questions but I think we may be out of time.
we may be out of time. I guess one of the thing I would add is if anyone here is interested in finding out more about the research or has an interest in having research done where they are through a bar association, through another group, please feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to talk to you about it.
And I would just add why data is so important is that it provides the empirical validation of the conduct we know that is going on. Everyone has experienced bullying, probably starting back when they were in elementary, middle, and high school. And unfortunately, it continues in law school and then in practice. But actually having that data and understanding what the data means is really the first step in formulating the types of effective policies that will address that conduct. So thank you again so much for this.
Alrighty then, this concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much, Bobby, and thank you so much, Stephanie, for your time, and thank you to our audience. Have a good
Thank
morning,
you.
everybody.
You may be eligible for CLE credit in your state. Visit bhba.org/podcasts for more information.